Hello, good evening, and welcome once again to another gripping episode of The Last Clue. I hope you and your loved ones are safe, healthy, and taking good care of each other. Tonight, we step into a world woven with threads of love, passion, and obsession emotions so intense that they often blur the line between beauty and destruction. What really separates love from obsession? Passion from madness? If you ask someone, they might say the difference is subtle, almost invisible. But when a person begins to lose themselves in their desire, when passion crosses all limits, that's when a quiet line is drawn. Is it still love? Or has it become something darker? Something uncontrollable, a madness that consumes everything in its path? This is the story we uncover tonight. And when someone reaches that breaking point, society no longer knows what to call them: a lover, a madman, a sinner, or a soul beyond redemption. Such a person slowly begins to detach from people, from norms, from everything we call normal. Because society, after all, has its own rules. A person is born, grows up, lives among others, and when their time comes, they're laid to rest either on a funeral pyre or buried in the earth. That's the way it's always been. That is the truth of life. But just as there is a whole system for the living, homes, relationships, routines, there's an entire world that exists after death too. A world with its own order, its own silence, its own rituals. And sometimes the biggest mystery lies in how a person slips away from both. From the world of the living and from the peace of the dead. And perhaps that's exactly why you'll never find a cremation ground or a graveyard in the heart of a bustling city. They're always pushed to the outskirts, hidden from daily life. Because we draw that line ourselves, this side for the living, that side for the dead. But what if someone refuses to draw that line? What if a man living right in the middle of a crowded neighborhood loses someone dear, and instead of letting go, he chooses to keep the dead close, not for a day or two, but for 7 long years. 7 years of dressing the corpse in fresh clothes. 7 years of decorating it like a bride. 7 years of whispering to it, talking to it, loving it as if death never came at all. Then tell me, what would you call that? Love? Madness? Or something far more haunting? There are many such stories, and I've shared some with you before, where death came, but the bond didn't break. Where the body wasn't buried in a graveyard, but kept within the walls of a home. But tonight's story is different. It's not just about love. It's not just about madness. It's about obsession. About a heart that refused to let go even when the whole world said it was time. And what makes it more haunting is that this isn't the story of a superstitious man. This is the story of a doctor, an educated, rational man. A man of science. Today, we uncover the tale of Dr. Karl Tanzler. Born in Germany, Dr. Tanzler lived through the chaos of war. When the First World War ended, he left Germany in search of peace, but perhaps the war inside him had only just begun. Everything in his life was unsettled and chaos. So Dr. Karl Tanzler set his sights on a new beginning and left for America. He arrived there, carrying not just his belongings, but a strange burden, a secret that had haunted him since childhood. From a very young age, Karl was visited by a recurring dream. In that dream, he would always see a girl with long black hair, radiant beauty, and eyes that felt both familiar and distant. She never spoke, but her presence was unforgettable. This wasn't just a fleeting childhood fantasy. The dream followed him for years. And there was something even stranger, a vision of one of his ancestors would often appear in those dreams. That ancestor would whisper the same thing every time. The girl you see, she is your destiny. She is the one you will marry. She is your one true love. And Karl believed it. He didn't just dream her, he waited for her. All of this existed only in his dreams: the girl, the ancestor, the prophecy. But the dreams came so often, so vividly, that Dr. Karl Tanzler began to believe they were more than just dreams. He believed they were signs of something real. He held on to them like truth. As the years passed, Karl grew up. He completed his studies, pursued a career in medicine, and eventually made his way to America, chasing not just a future, but perhaps fate itself. In America, he found work at a hospital. He wasn't yet a doctor in practice, but he was close to the field, working as a lab technician, operating X-ray machines and handling medical equipment. But even in this new world, far from his homeland, one thing hadn't changed. The girl. The same girl with black hair. She still came to him in dreams. Again and again. As if waiting. As if calling. But that girl, the one from his dreams, never appeared in real life. No matter how much he waited, how deeply he believed, she remained a shadow in his sleep, never stepping into his waking world. And so, in the year 1899, Dr. Karl Tanzler's marriage was arranged, but not with the woman from his dreams. This was someone else. A kind, real woman from the world he lived in. Friends and family tried to reason with him. Dreams are not destiny, Karl. There's a difference between what we see with closed eyes and what we live with open ones. Eventually, Karl gave in. He convinced himself that maybe they were right, that maybe the dreams were just that, dreams. And so he got married. In time, he became a father to 2 children. Life began to move forward, slowly shifting into something normal, something ordinary. But deep inside, something remained untouched, waiting. Life was moving on quietly, steadily. But in 1926, everything changed again. It had been 27 years since Dr. Karl Tanzler got married. After nearly 3 decades of family life in Germany, a wife, 2 children, a seemingly stable home, Karl made an unexpected decision. He left it all behind. He left his wife. He left his children. And he returned to America. Back in the United States, he resumed work at a hospital. By now, age had begun to show. His hair was graying, his energy slower, and the dreams of his youth nearly forgotten. Almost. But then came the date that would change everything, April 22, 1930. It was an ordinary day in the hospital. Dr. Karl was doing his usual rounds, immersed in routine. And then a new patient walked in. Her name was Elena Helen. She was just 30 years old. And in that moment, the moment he looked at her, time froze. Because standing in front of him was the girl from his dreams. By this time, Dr. Karl Tanzler was around 60, maybe 62. Elena Helen was just 30. She was half his age. To anyone else, it was just another routine day at the hospital. Patients came and went. Nothing unusual. But for Dr. Karl, that day was anything but ordinary. As he worked quietly in the lab, he glanced up and saw her. The moment his eyes met hers, he froze. Time seemed to stop. His hands trembled. His breath caught. Because the woman standing before him, the patient named Elena, looked exactly like her. The girl from his dreams. The one he had seen again and again as a child. The one with long black hair and hauntingly beautiful eyes. After all these years, after leaving Germany, after building and abandoning a life, after almost forgetting that vision from his youth, she was here, standing just a few feet away, as real as the air around him. That ordinary day in April 1930 suddenly became anything but ordinary. The moment Dr. Karl saw her, the fire he thought had long burned out was reignited. In a single instant, the dream of his childhood came rushing back with overwhelming force. The girl who had visited him for decades in sleep, with flowing black hair and quiet grace, was now standing right in front of him. And in that moment, Carl felt a deep certainty settle over him. She's the one, he thought. This is the girl my ancestors spoke of. This is the one I was meant to marry. This is my destiny. For the first time, it felt like the dream hadn't been an illusion, it had been a prophecy. But what could he say? She was just a patient, a stranger. And she left without knowing the storm she had stirred inside him. After she walked out, Carl turned to his colleagues and quietly asked, why was she here? What's wrong with her? Because now she was no longer just a face from a dream. She had become real, and he needed to know everything about her. What's her name? Dr. Carl asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice trembled ever so slightly. One of the staff checked the patient list and replied, her name is Elena Helen, and she's a tuberculosis patient. Tuberculosis. In that era, it was almost a death sentence, a disease for which there was no reliable cure. Hearing this, Dr. Carl felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. The woman he had been waiting for all his life, the girl from his dreams, had finally appeared. And now fate had brought her to him only to tell him that her time was running out. From that day onward, Elena began visiting the hospital regularly for treatment. And every time she walked through those doors, Dr. Carl would be waiting not just as a doctor, but as a man who believed he was standing on the edge of his destiny. Using her treatment as an excuse, Dr. Carl began spending more time around Elena. The conversation started slowly polite, professional. But with each passing day, they grew warmer, more personal. She continued coming for her checkups, and he continued waiting for her like a man rediscovering purpose. For Dr. Carl, these were the happiest moments he had known in decades. The woman he had seen in his dreams since childhood, she was no longer a vision. She was real, breathing, smiling, speaking. Then, one day, he decided to tell her the truth. He looked at her and said softly, when I lived in Germany, I used to have a dream. In that dream, two women appeared. One was a member of my own family, and the other was you. My ancestor would always say, she is your destiny. She is the one you'll marry. I waited for years, but time kept moving, and before I knew it, I was 60. He paused, eyes filled with wonder and disbelief. And just when I thought it was too late, you walked into my life. When Dr. Carl shared the story of his dream, Elena listened quietly, her expression filled with both surprise and uncertainty. She finally responded, softly but firmly. I don't know how real or unreal your dream is, but I'm already married. There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy. Then she continued, I was pregnant once, but I lost the baby. After that, my husband left me. Since then, I've been living with my parents and now with this illness. In that quiet hospital corridor, two broken lives began to open up to each other. He told her about the years of waiting. She told him about the pain of being abandoned. And yet, she kept returning for her treatment, and perhaps for the strange comfort she found in his company. Despite the 32-year age gap, she just 30, and he's 62, a silent bond had begun to form. One born not of logic, but of longing, loss, and something that felt like fate. After listening to Dr. Carl's story, the dreams, the waiting, the belief, something in Elena began to shift. She didn't say much, but her eyes softened. Her voice grew warmer. Slowly, she too began leaning toward him, perhaps out of compassion, or perhaps something deeper. But just as this delicate bond was beginning to form, her hospital visits came to an end. The medical staff informed her gently, "We've done everything we could. Now it's time for you to rest at home. We've prescribed the medicines. Just follow them and don't worry. The rest of the care can be managed from home." In other words, there was nothing more they could do. And with that, Elena stopped coming to the hospital. The routine was broken. Her presence vanished. The hallways felt emptier. When Dr. Carl found out, his heart sank. She was gone again. Not to death, not to distance, but to silence. And this time, he wasn't ready to let her slip away. Dr. Carl grew restless. He had grown used to seeing her every day. Her voice, her presence had become a part of his world. And now suddenly she was gone. The silence was unbearable. Unable to stay away, he made a decision. One day, he went to Helen's home. Her parents, having seen him regularly at the hospital, recognized him immediately. To them, he wasn't just a stranger, he was the doctor who had been caring for their daughter. With a calm voice and sincere eyes, Dr. Carl said, "Please don't worry. I'll take care of her right here at home. I'll bring the medicines. I'll make sure everything she needs is provided." Touched by his concern, the family agreed. After all, here was someone from the hospital, someone they trusted, someone willing to care for their daughter, but even the doctors had stepped back. And so, from that day forward, Dr. Carl began visiting Helen's home every single day. No longer as just a doctor, but as something more. Dr. Carl was no longer just a visitor. He had become a part of Helen's world. Driven by an obsession he called love, he began crossing lines no doctor ever should. From the hospital, he started quietly taking or hiding basic medical supplies, medicines, equipment, anything that could help ease her pain. He brought it all to Helen's house. Day after day, he cared for her as if she were already his, not legally, not through vows, but in his mind she was his wife. The dream still lived inside him, refusing to fade. "She is my life," he would tell himself. "She was meant for me, I've always known it." Even as her condition worsened, even as death stood closer than ever, he kept returning every single day from the hospital to her home. He would sit beside her for hours, talk to her, watch her, listen to every word as if time had frozen in the fragile space between reality and obsession. Helen's parents, too, began to notice the way Dr. Carl cared for their daughter. He gave her time far more than anyone else ever had. And they too knew the truth, that their daughter was slipping away, that the days ahead were limited. And when a family begins to accept such a painful reality, the presence of someone who stands beside you selflessly, patiently begins to feel like a blessing. Not a single wrong thought entered their minds. Instead, they were grateful. Grateful that someone was there to care for Helen with such quiet devotion. So the visits continued. The conversations, the medicines, the unspoken bond. It had all begun on April 22, 1930, the day Dr. Carl first laid eyes on Helen in the hospital. And now, nearly a year and a half had passed. But none of them knew that the most haunting chapter of this story was yet to come. And then, on 25th April 1931, the inevitable happened. The fear that had quietly lingered in every breath, every glance, every silent pause became real. Helen passed away. Tuberculosis had claimed her life. When Dr. Carl heard the news, he rushed to her home in disbelief. He stood frozen, unable to accept the finality of it. The woman he had dreamed of since childhood, the woman he believed was his destiny, had slipped away after just a brief moment together. A year, maybe a little more. And now she was gone. Heartbroken and overwhelmed, Dr. Carl made a request to Helen's family. A desperate, heartfelt plea. He wanted to conduct her last rites himself. He offered to take care of all the expenses, every detail, every ritual. Helen's parents, moved by his devotion and knowing how deeply he had cared for their daughter, agreed. They had seen the bond. They had felt his presence in those final months, and they had no objection. And truly, what objection could there be? When someone shows that kind of devotion, that kind of grief silence becomes the only response. Dr. Carl personally arranged for Helen's burial in the same city. He had a large grave prepared, a resting place worthy of what she meant to him. And there, Helen was laid to rest. From the very next day, Dr. Carl began visiting her grave every single day. He would sit by her tombstone for hours, lost in his own world, whispering, pausing, smiling faintly, sometimes even laughing softly as though she were right there beside him. To anyone watching, it looked like he was simply talking to himself. But to Dr. Carl, he was still talking to Helen. In those early days, Helen's family also came often bringing flowers, saying quiet prayers. Among them was Helen's elder sister, who had traveled after hearing the news of her passing. She, too, visited the grave, frequently unaware that the man sitting nearby was quietly slipping deeper into a reality of his own making. Every time Helen's sister visited the cemetery, she saw him. Dr. Carl already there, sitting silently by the grave, unmoving, lost in thought, or perhaps in conversation with someone only he could see. At first, the family found it strange, but grief has many forms. Maybe they thought he had loved her more deeply than anyone had realized. Maybe this was his way of mourning, of coping. Time moved on, as it always does. The family's visits became less frequent. Life pulled them back, one responsibility at a time. But not Dr. Carl. He kept returning, every single day. Through the heat of summer, the snow of winter, and the stillness of every passing season, he was there. 2 years passed like this. 2 years of silent vigils and whispered monologues to a grave that never replied. And then, in April 1933, almost exactly 2 years after Helen's death, her elder sister returned to town, unaware that what she was about to discover would haunt her forever. That same April, Helen's sister visited the grave once again. Just like before, she carried fresh flowers, a silent gesture of remembrance. She knelt, placed them gently on the headstone, and sat there for a moment soaking in the stillness. But something felt different. Something was missing. She looked around. For the first time in 2 years, the spot beside the grave, the one where Dr. Carl always sat, was empty. A cold silence lingered in its place. When she returned home, she asked her family, "Have you noticed? Dr. Carl isn't coming to the cemetery anymore." 4 months, no. For years, he sat there every single day. And now suddenly nothing. Where is he? The family, perhaps trying to comfort themselves, replied, maybe time has finally begun to heal him. But Helen's sister wasn't convinced. She remembered his eyes, the depth of his grief, the fire of devotion in them. No, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. That kind of love, that kind of madness doesn't just disappear. 2 years had passed since Helen's death, but her sister still couldn't understand one thing. Why had Dr. Carl stopped coming to the grave? She asked the family again. They dismissed her concern, saying, "You're overthinking. It's just your imagination. He was just a doctor, nothing more. He treated Helen at the hospital, that's all. No relative, no connection." But her heart wasn't ready to accept that. She had seen his eyes. She had seen the way he sat for hours in silence by that grave, as if guarding something sacred. So she kept visiting the cemetery again and again. The grave was the same. The flowers withered, replaced, withered again. But that one figure, the man who once seemed a permanent part of the landscape, had vanished. Then one day, she went to the hospital just out of curiosity. And to her surprise, she found out that Dr. Carl was still alive. He hadn't gone anywhere. He still came to the hospital regularly. But for some reason, he had completely stopped visiting the grave. Why? That question now haunted her more than ever. She knew that something wasn't right. That restlessness in her heart wouldn't let her sleep. So one day, Helen's sister decided, I'll find out the truth myself. She went to Dr. Carl's house, but the house was locked. He wasn't there. She waited for a while, then thought, maybe he's moved away, maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I've built a story out of nothing. She returned home. Time passed. 1933 turned into 1938, 5 long years. Then, once again, Helen's sister came back to town. The first place she visited was the graveyard. And once again, the same silence greeted her. The grave was still there, but Dr. Carl? Still missing. Gone like he had never existed. But a question burned quietly inside her. A man who came to our home every day, who treated Helen as if she were his world, who sat by her grave for 2 whole years, how could he just vanish? That kind of devotion doesn't disappear without reason. And she was ready to uncover it. The same man, the one who once brought every last medicine from the hospital for Helen, the one who bore all the expenses for her final rites, the one who sat by her grave for hours morning and evening, talking to the wind, whispering to the silence. Why did he suddenly stop coming? Why did he turn his face away from the very place that once held his entire world? These questions haunted Helen's sister. And then she discovered something that made her even more restless. Dr. Carl never left the city. He was still there, still alive, still practicing. 7 long years had passed since Helen's death in 1931. Now it was 1938. Helen's sister came back again, driven by the weight of a question that wouldn't let her sleep. Why would a man who once lived at the edge of grief suddenly abandon her memory? Something wasn't adding up. And now she was determined to find out the truth. And this time the question finally met its answer. Helen's sister found out that Dr. Carl was still living in the same city. She said to herself, let me go to his house one more time. Last time the door was locked. She had thought she would never return. But this time, coincidentally, the door was open. She walked up and rang the bell. Dr. Carl answered. He looked at her and smiled, as if nothing had changed. With calm politeness, he invited her in, and while he stepped into the kitchen to get her a glass of water, she glanced around the house. And then she froze. Her eyes fell on a room down the hallway, slightly ajar. She pushed the door open slowly. What she saw made her heart stop. There, lying on a bed, dressed in white, was a human body. Not a skeleton. Not ashes. Body. As if it had been carefully preserved. As if it had never been buried at all. And in that moment she realized. The grave she'd been visiting for 7 years was empty. And like a bride, a real bride, I kept her at home, Dr. Carl confessed, his voice calm, almost proud. Not just that, every single day. I used to talk to her for hours. On that same bed, I placed her body and slept beside her. For 7 years, 7 long years, I believed Helen was my wife. I kept her with me in my house, in my room, on my bed. She was never a corpse to me. She was never a stranger. She was Helen, my Helen. When this chilling truth came to light, there was shock everywhere. The police arrived immediately. Dr. Carl was arrested without resistance, and within hours, he was standing in front of the judge, in a courtroom that could barely believe what it had just heard. But later the court reached a shocking conclusion: this was not considered a crime. So if it wasn't a crime, what about the punishment? Dr. Carl's mental state, his lifelong obsession, Helen's tragic story, and most importantly, her family's testimony, everything was taken into account. Her family told the court he never harmed Helen. He never disrespected her memory. If anything, he loved her, cared for her in her final days, and even took full responsibility for her last rites. They said he only ever helped our daughter. And with all this before them, the court made its decision: Dr. Carl would walk free. No punishment, no charges. And just like that, the man who kept the corpse in his home for 7 years was released. But during his time in custody, the police recovered Helen's remains from that house. What was left of her? And quietly, with no press, no noise, her body was returned to her family. This time for her final goodbye. By now, Helen's family fully understood one thing. Dr. Carl's mind was no longer stable. So while he remained in police custody, the family took possession of Helen's remains once again. And this time they buried her for the second time. But unlike before, this burial was done in absolute secrecy, a secluded spot known only to a few within the family. No headstone, no name, no record, just silence. Because they were certain of one thing: if Dr. Carl ever found out where she was buried again, he would return. And he might take her back. To protect Helen's body, the second burial was done with absolute secrecy. So secret that not even a trace was left behind. No records, no witnesses, no answers. That secret was buried forever. All of this happened in 1938. After that, Dr. Carl lived on. 14 long years passed. And then on July 3rd, 1952, Dr. Carl quietly passed away. But those who knew him closely said till his very last breath, he never let go of Helen. He spent years searching, trying to find out where she had been buried. Which cemetery? Which grave? But he never found it. Because the family's silence was unbreakable. So unbreakable that even the name of the graveyard was never recorded. Normally, every cemetery has a name. But in this case, not even that was revealed. Everything from the location to the burial was deliberately kept nameless, faceless, forgotten, so that Dr. Carl would never ever find her final resting place. And just like that, this strange, unsettling chapter of human emotion came to an end. Now, how you choose to understand it, as a tale of eternal love or disturbing obsession, the decision is entirely yours. So that was today's story. And if it sent shivers down your spine, trust me, this is only the beginning. The Last Clue brings you real stories every single week: true crime, psychological thrillers, covert operations, untold chapters of world history, celebrity secrets, unsolved mysteries, and the darkest corners of the human mind. If you're someone who lives for the truth behind the headlines, for stories that disturb, fascinate, and stay with you long after they end, then hit that subscribe button now. Because the next tale might just be the one that haunts you forever. Subscribe because the truth won't wait. I'll see you next time with another chilling, unforgettable story. Until then, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for watching.